Hello friends, Charlie here from Base Miami, and I wanted to welcome you to our video series where we'll be discussing everything related to expansion into the US market. And today we have the pleasure of having a chat with Steve Maggi, who's the managing partner at SMA Law Firm, an immigration law firm specializing in working with entrepreneurs and foreign companies. And we'll be discussing different topics related to immigration as a foreign entrepreneur. So Steve, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Charlie, for the invitation.
Sure. And Steve, let me ask you and start with the first one, that is in terms of visa options to moving to the States for startups, which do you think are the principal options available and what factors are important in deciding which one to use?
The most important question to ask is what is the nationality of the people that are coming to the US? So that can be the founders, the investors, the managers, executives, or essential employees, and the principal owners of the US business. So for example, if you're from Argentina and you set up a US company and 50% or more of the US company is owned by Argentine citizens or companies, then anybody with an Argentine passport qualifies for E2. That's the main visa that's used for entrepreneurs and for investors. And you have to have a passport from a country that has a treaty with the United States. So your path depends on your citizenship and who the owners are. So if you're Brazilian, for example, Brazil does not have an E2 treaty with the United States. So you can only apply if you have an Italian passport or a different passport if you're starting your own business in the US. So if you don't have a passport from one of the 82 countries that has an E2 treaty, then you need to apply for a different kind of visa. And oftentimes that's an L1 visa, which is the visa for transferring in between companies. So it's for foreign companies essentially that are setting up subsidiaries in the US. Then you can transfer a manager or an executive or somebody with what's called specialized knowledge to the US. So the easiest way is through E2 if you qualify and if your nationality matches that of the owners of the US company. If not, then you would use the L1 visa to transfer people to the US from a foreign company.
Okay, great. And in terms of E2, what are the main things that they need to prove in order to get an E2 visa?
There are a certain number of tests that you have to pass in order to qualify for E2. The most important one is what's called the substantiality test, which says that you have to invest at least enough money to cover all operating costs for the first full year of operation. If you do that, then it's considered substantial. So that's the first one. And that amount depends on the size and scope of your business, how many employees you project to create. So there's no magic number, there's no minimum by law, but you have to invest more than you are going to spend in the first year, and you have to make sure that you are creating jobs. So you need to project at least 2 jobs will be created in the first year. That's the first test. And the other one is called the marginality test. And what that says is if you're the only one that's benefiting from the petition, then it's considered marginal for the purposes of the visa petition, and you won't qualify. What that means is if only you and your family will be working and benefiting, that's not enough. You need to show that you will create jobs and that your business model necessitates that you create those jobs, or there's no incentive for the government to give you that visa.
Mm-hmm. And you know, I was thinking that if that has changed at all, because I remember that before, like business plans were, let's say, easier to present. They had sort of a format and it was easy, and now they became more challenging in terms of the viability of the business plan. Has that been your experience?
I'm not sure if that's the case. I would say that the business plan has become the most important document in the E2 process, especially E2s. They're also required for L1s, but what they're going to do is make sure that you meet all the legal tests like substantiality and marginality, and then the final decision is made on whether the project is really viable and whether it really will create those jobs. If the probability of success is low, then the chances of getting approved are low. So the most important document becomes that 5-year business plan with projections for growth, income, revenue, and most importantly, the creation of new US jobs.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and what do you think that are preliminary steps that they should take before applying for the visa to maximize their chances of success?
There are certain steps that have to be in place. You have to show a certain level of commitment and risk in order to qualify. So you have to set up a US entity which will sponsor the visa petition. You have to get a tax ID number, set up a bank account, and then you have to do the funding of the business with that amount that we talked about, which is at least enough to cover the first year costs. And then lastly, you need to make sure that you have what's called sufficient physical premises. So if you're projecting 2 new jobs to be created plus the person that's coming to the US, then you need an office space for at least 3 people, 3 desks. Once you've done that and you've paid for that first month's rent and you have your bank statement to show the funds coming in and the funds being spent or put at risk, then you can apply for the visa. So those are preliminary steps. Before that, of course, what people need to do is plan and do the market research and work with Base Miami to make sure that it's a really good idea first, that it's a viable business before they take any of those steps.
Yeah, definitely. And you know, it's funny that as we have these times of COVID and the fact of the remote work, etc., how the co-working spaces or the working from home will affect these laws in the future, I guess, when they decide to modify some of these.
I think that this happens everywhere, not just in America. In our native Argentina, a lot of places, the law is always 3 steps behind reality. Yeah. And I think that's especially true when it comes to businesses that are based on technology, like a lot of the companies that both you and I work with. Yeah. The laws are not in place yet to regulate some of these industries, and they don't understand the concept yet of remote workers. So that physical premises we talked about, that sufficient space that's physical, that hasn't changed yet. That's still what the law says. So they expect to see that you've signed a contract because it shows a certain level of commitment and that you're willing to risk your investment. That's really the key. You're winning the trust of the officer that's adjudicating your case.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay, and talking about that, what is the national interest exception, and how can entrepreneurs use it to enter the US and move their projects forward?
Wow, well, that's something that I talk about for 10 minutes in my video, so I'll try to make it very simple. This year, we've seen a lot of presidential proclamations and executive orders which have stopped immigration for certain kinds of visas. They've stopped direct travel to the US from certain countries. And so the national interest exception is something new that allows people who normally wouldn't be able to get a visa, like L1A or L1B people, to actually get an emergency interview and come in as an exception to that proclamation. The same goes for people who are traveling directly from countries like Brazil, for example, that now has a bar for direct entry. If you apply for a national interest exception, they can waive that for you and say, okay, in your specific case, we will allow you to travel directly to the US. But you have to show that the US economy will benefit from that. You have to show an economic effect in order to qualify for the exception. So the exception applies to those people who don't have their visas yet or are coming from countries that you can't directly travel from. Hopefully, depending on the elections, that won't be necessary as of 2021. But for now, it's a very important tool to use if you need to come to the US to run your business.
And you know, talking about the presidential election, what effect do you think that the presidential election will have on foreign entrepreneurs and their visa possibilities?
I think that you've probably seen this too when trying to gauge interest in the US, because that's what both of us do. We essentially sell the American dream to people and we help them achieve that. And a lot of people are saying that they're waiting for the election results to see what to do. So I think that these elections are extremely important. I've heard that there are trillions of dollars on hold in terms of investment into the US, depending on the election. So I think that if the administration stays, the same one stays, it will continue to be a challenge. And that's not impossible, but it's a challenge for all of us. And if it changes and it becomes democratic, I think you'll see a lot of these measures and proclamations and executive orders will be taken back. And it will look like business did 4 years ago. That will take some time, though. It will take some time to undo some of those measures. But I think that this election has a big impact on investors, entrepreneurs, and foreign companies, and whether they're really welcome or not, or how difficult it might be or not.
So yeah, and added to the current situation with COVID, I guess then it's time more to wait or plan than execute, I guess. And I wanted to ask you that in terms of COVID, can entrepreneurs still plan for immigration in terms of actually, immigrating to the country, or the COVID is kind of stopping things as well?
No, I would say COVID has slowed things down. The embassies are now open again. E2 visas are being accepted in most embassies and consulates now. So I think that they're backed up, and you have to have a little bit more patience. But certainly, if you're planning, this is a perfect time to plan for 2021 and to start getting your applications ready, because they will take several months to be adjudicated. I think that COVID has slowed things down, but now I think that it's time to really start planning and to put your plans into action.